So it is our good karma to be able to have Ajahn Nissarano as our speaker tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Hock Chin, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. So, very nice. Some people might think of me as having lived in a cave for 8 years, a caveman. Somebody thought I was living like Neanderthal man. Not quite, it was very comfy. So good. So this evening we start with a meditation as usual, with a guided meditation. And as always, I like to have a theme for the meditation. And the theme that I felt that came to mind was freedom, because we hear about freedom quite a bit these days, and I'll talk about it in the talk as well. And but what we focus on in meditation, of course, is not thinking about freedom. That's not the point. Is to bring up the feeling of freedom. And I think everybody really knows that feeling of freedom that comes from letting go of something that's been a problem, that's been a burden in our lives. And it brings immediately this sense of joy and happiness into the mind, a lightness of being, we often say. So it's sort of uplifting, it brings hope, and it's positive. So this feeling is very useful in meditation, because what we can do is infuse the meditation with this feeling. We are all, as Aikema, one of my teachers, said, our lives, human beings' lives, are run by feeling. It's not thinking. It's feeling that drives our lives. And for everybody, this feeling of freedom can come from different triggers. Like when we walk in the bush, we go for a walk in the bush, either on our own or with other people. Sometimes when we see a fantastic panorama, sometimes at the beach, these sorts of places can bring up this feeling of freedom for us. I know for me, starting a journey it's quite interesting why that should be. Starting a holiday, going on a holiday, it can bring this sense of leaving it all behind, all the problems, all the difficulties, putting them down for a while. And of course, for some people too, coming to a monastery, coming to a place like the Buddhist Society of Western Australia can bring up that feeling too of freedom. Doing a meditation retreat. And also some people will recognise this feeling of freedom you can get sometimes when you're playing sports, like swimming, surfing, mountain climbing, any of these things. And even, for dancers and so on, when they get into what we call the zone, and there's this sort of quality of the body performing and the mind watching what's happening. And this can be a sense of freedom too. So this evening we will, for each of us, look for a trigger. Try to remember occasions when we had this feeling of freedom, and use that in the meditation to colour the whole of the meditation, the present moment, the breath, and to share it at the end of the meditation. So the reason I teach this all the time, actually not often, is that I teach using feeling in the meditation is because it makes the meditation object that more attractive, it becomes very attractive. And when the meditation object is attractive, be it the breath, walking, whatever it is, we can stay with it. And when we stay with anything long enough, then the automatic process the Buddha talks about will arise, where there would be joy, happiness, tranquility in the body, and then the mind will come together. That will happen by itself if we can stay long enough. Many people use force, but that doesn't work. It's not sustainable anyway. So we can have a guided meditation. There's only 20 minutes now. It's getting shorter with all this talking. So if you'd like to find a posture that is comfortable for you, so we can close the eyes and we can get in touch with the body all the better, really. And we can let go of the past and the future. The past is history, and the future is a mystery. Just to be here, to arrive here. Sometimes we're rushing to come, to get here in time. Now just for us to arrive here, be in the present moment. Be free in the present moment. And there's nothing we need to do, and nowhere we need to go. We're just free for the time of the meditation. Free of the past, the future. And we can focus on the body and just make any adjustments we need to bring a sense of balance. To balance the head over the shoulders and the shoulders over the hips. To feel this sense of relaxation, but alignment as well. And we can relax the body mentally using this kindness, this care, soothing the body, starting at the top of the head and relaxing the top of the head, back of the head and sides of the head. And moving our attention down the face, relaxing as we go, soothing it around the eyes, around the mouth, and down to the neck, all around the neck, giving this mental massage. And moving the attention, bringing to mind the right shoulder, and moving our attention along the right shoulder with this gentle, warm, kind attention. And bringing to mind the right arm and moving our attention down the right arm to include the elbow, the wrist, hand and fingers, with a soothing, relaxing attention. And we can bring to mind the left shoulder and move our attention along the left shoulder, giving it a good mental massage and letting go of the burden and any tension in the left shoulder. Now moving the attention to the left arm, starting at the top of the left arm and moving down to include the elbow, wrist, hand and fingers, giving this warm, caring attention to the left arm. Allowing the left arm to relax. And now bringing to mind the back, starting at just below the shoulders and moving our attention down the back, giving it this mental massage. allowing any tension, any uncomfortable areas to relax, soothing them. And now bringing to our minds the front of the body, starting below the shoulders and moving our attention down the front of the body to include the chest, the diaphragm, the abdomen, soothing and relaxing any tense areas, any areas of pressure, soothing it with this kindness, care and warmth. And now bringing to mind the right leg, starting at the top of the right leg and moving our attention down the right leg to include the knee, ankle, foot and toes, soothing it, relaxing it with this kindness, this care. And now bringing to mind the left leg, starting at the top of the left leg and moving our attention down the left leg to include the knee, ankle, foot and toes with this soothing mental massage. And now becoming aware of the whole body, just sitting here comfortably with a sense of full of care and kindness, relaxed, soothed, calmed, from head to toe. And now we can just remember anything that has triggered, has brought up for us this feeling of freedom in our lives. It may be walking in the bush, starting a journey, going to a monastery, going on holiday, or going on a meditation retreat. Just bringing up, seeing it what's triggered this feeling of freedom, being unburdened, lightened a sense of joy, of having let go of something that was difficult or oppressive. So we get in contact with that feeling, however we experience it, and fill our minds and bodies with this feeling of freedom, this lightness of being. And we allow this feeling to colour whatever we're experiencing here in the present moment, be it the sounds, feelings in the body, the temperature, whatever we're aware of, moment by moment, colouring it with this feeling of freedom, of joy, of lightness. And when the breath comes to you, when you become aware of the breath, just to notice it coming in, coming out, and where it is coming in, coming out, whether at the nose, chest, or abdomen, wherever you're aware of the breath coming and going. It can be a useful reference point during the meditation. And we can give this gift of the feeling of freedom to the breath. So the breath becomes this freedom. Breathing in, free. Breathing out, free. And if the feeling of freedom diminishes, we can just recall whatever triggered that feeling, whatever we used that brought that feeling up, to refresh the feeling of freedom. And we can share this feeling of freedom. Share it with everyone here and watching online, wishing that they may have this feeling of freedom, this joy, this letting go of a burden. And we can expand this sharing to include everyone in this area and keep expanding to include the whole earth, all the beings, sharing this feeling of freedom, lightness of being. Wishing all beings, may you be free within yourselves, wherever you are, whatever your circumstances and difficulties. And now we can bring the attention back to ourselves and anchor this feeling of freedom in our hearts and have the aspiration to use this feeling of freedom as often as we can and to use it as a refuge. And we can, at this stage of the meditation, coming close to the end of the meditation, just ask ourselves, how do I feel? Did I experience this feeling of freedom or not? And if I did, what caused it to arise? And now ring the bell 3 times, and on the 3rd time, if you'd like to come out of meditation, open your eyes slowly and relax the body. So we can open the eyes and come out of meditation. So I hope you were able to get in contact with or for the trigger that feeling of freedom within yourselves. I think everybody, it's a very common human experience, that this feeling of freedom. The Buddha called it, in the Pali it was called vimutti rasa, the taste of freedom. And I have a quotation about that in a short time. Freedom is such an important concept, isn't it, at the moment? I have seen, as you've probably seen, many of these protests about COVID restrictions. And what's the word you see most often with them? Freedom, freedom. And they're often called freedom rallies. And I even saw that there were rallies here in Perth, but there were no restrictions here. I think the same in Darwin, actually, and the same in Byron Bay. They were protesting about restrictions, and they didn't have any. But it's sometimes it's the concept that people are protesting about, that we should have our individual freedom. And often, and you see it with COVID, I think it's often that we can't do what we like when we like. We're very used to that. And so these restrictions we find odious, we find them limiting. And of course, for people who are focusing on looking for the happiness outside, going places, eating, watching movies, meeting friends, all these, listening to music, whatever, all those things, then of course these restrictions are terrible. But I've noticed that many meditators have told me, actually, I don't know whether you've felt this, you feel sort of guilty when you say it's, actually, I've enjoyed the COVID restrictions. You feel like you shouldn't be saying that, really. Nobody else thinks that you... But it's true that many meditators have actually felt quite happy with the COVID restrictions and have actually found that they can enjoy their practice and perhaps spend more time on meditation and study as well. And of course, this is, in a sense, this is what our 3-month arranged retreat, you've heard of the 3-month arranged retreat? Every year in Theravada tradition, we have a 3-month arranged retreat. And this is a period when monks and nuns stay in their monasteries for 3 months. And we only go out for emergencies, like health emergencies, or if somebody dies, a monk or a nun will go and perform a funeral. And even further than that, in the Bodhinyana monastery, Ajahn Brahm's monastery, every monk gets 2 weeks that they spend in their kuti. So they're not only locked down in the monastery, locked down in their kuti. Of course, we have to go to the shower, the toilets, and so on, get the food. But all of the community of monks and nuns, usually this is a very prized thing, to have this retreat period. And it's a very valued thing, because we are looking not so much for the happiness from seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting and touching, not so much from the happiness from outside ourselves as the happiness inside ourselves. And this is the purpose of meditation, to calm the mind, to bring it together, to allow this, and to do that, we have to have this happiness in the mind, which is why I often emphasize feeling as a vehicle for that, bringing up that gladness, that happiness. And this is a very important thing. We're looking for happiness in a different place from what many people are looking for. And I'd ask you anyway, where does happiness come from? Everybody knows, actually. Where does it come from? Inside. It's not as if happiness is coming from something external to us. A very attractive person, a man or a woman, wonderful food. Somebody else could see that person. Somebody else could eat that food and think, oh, yuck, not my taste. So it's not coming from outside. We're giving the happiness to these things. The happiness is coming from us. So this is the importance of developing the mind. This is why monastics develop the mind, monks and nuns. And to me, the best example, who do you think the best example is? Ajahn Brahm is a very good example of that happiness and that wisdom that's come from developing the mind, from going inside, not outside. So this is a very important thing, that we're happy to stay put, we're happy to go inside. We don't feel that the COVID restrictions are difficult for us, so difficult. So it's actually, as I say, for many meditators, been a blessing in disguise. But we shouldn't say that too loudly. Other people say, what are they talking about? And of course, for different people, freedom is can be very different things, can't it? often we're talking about worldly freedom, and this is what some people who are protesting are actually protesting about. You know, political freedom and freedom of the individual and freedom of speech. And of course, freedom of religion, so we can practice Buddhism or whatever religion we are interested in. So these things are, important freedoms that we enjoy in this society. And of course there's other freedoms from things like racial discrimination, gender discrimination, sexual orientation, discrimination about that. And of course some of the basic freedoms for us, of course, just being free from being hungry. Buddha actually says that is the greatest illness. The greatest illness is hunger. We have that organisation, freedom from hunger as well. But all the other things too, we need water, shelter, clothing and medicine. But really what we are interested in when we come to a Buddhist temple or a monastery is freedom, inner freedom, spiritual freedom. And as I say, this is where it's all coming from anyway. So whatever we develop in the mind, that's how we'll tend to see the world. And yet it's very obvious, really, isn't it? If we are depressed, anxious, worried, the world will look quite threatening, quite unpleasant for us. But if we have a mind that is relaxed, peaceful, calm, happy, the world is quite a different experience for us. So when we develop our minds, when we develop our hearts, we are actually colouring the world that we experience. It's the same world as the world that the person who's depressed is experiencing, the person who's anxious. But what a difference it is, because we are giving that, we're arousing that happiness in our minds, and so that's the way we will tend to experience the world. But of course, I was going to mention the quote. I was going to quote from the Buddha's teaching about freedom, because he mentions there's a famous teaching, and it comes from the numerical discourses of the Buddha, and it's in the 8s, and it's called, the sutta is called Paharada, and he was an asura. This is supposed to be a being that lives in the sea, lives in the great oceans, and he speaks to the Buddha about the 8 qualities, the 8 amazing and astounding qualities of the great ocean. And then he asks the Buddha, well, what about the Dhamma? And then the Buddha gives 8 qualities of the Dhamma. And this is one quality he mentions. He says, just as the great ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt, so too this Dhamma and training has but one taste, the taste of liberation. This is the 6th astounding and amazing quality that the bhikkhus see in this Dhamma and training. So this is the taste of freedom. It's wonderful, isn't it? It's a lovely term. And this is taste of freedom, of course, is vimutti rasa, I mentioned at the beginning of it. And so it's the whole path of Buddhism, not just the end part of the Buddhism. Of course, an enlightened being, an arahant, somebody that has finished the work, of course for them that is total freedom. They've arrived. They are not swayed by the world. No matter what conditions they encounter, they have that inner strength, that inner happiness, that inner peace. But as I mentioned in the meditation, this freedom is not just a word, and it's a feeling, as I mentioned, of lightness and of ending of something that's oppressive or unpleasant. And often it's likened to being released from prison, and it can be a prison of the body or the mind. But of course the most important thing to be released from in terms of prisons is the mind, because even if we're in prison physically, the mind doesn't have to be in prison. It can be free. And as I mentioned, there are many things that can trigger this feeling, and I hope some of you manage to bring up this feeling of freedom. I think it's a very fundamental experience, actually. It's not very alien, this experience of feeling freedom. And I remember, one of the occasions for me, and I think many of you may have had this experience too, was when I was at school. This was probably one of the first times, and I was doing swimming. That was my sport, at least in summer anyway, not in winter. And we had to do lots of laps of the pool. And I remember one occasion I was swimming, and then after a time it just became sort of automatic, and the mind was totally free and just swimming effortlessly. And obviously this is probably an example of being in the zone. It was really extraordinary for me to see that. And it's not only swimming or sports, dancers sometimes experience this too, when there's that separation almost, the mind is freed from the body, but the body is just doing it effortlessly. It's also a very good example of non-self. We talk about non-self in Buddhism, but it really feels like it when that happens. And also for me, very interesting for me, it sounds strange in a way, when I lived in Sri Lanka in the cave, you heard that I lived there for 8 years in a cave. It's on the side of a mountain, surrounded by the forest. It was a really beautiful place. It was really, wow, fantastic. A wonderful view, and they had a stream running next to the hut that only ran for about 5 months of the year. And then it had a waterfall. It still does have, actually, a waterfall and a rock pool below it where I used to bathe when I first came to that hut. But every morning at around daylight, when it's just daylight, usually around 6, I would go on the alms round. I don't know if you've heard of alms round. Monks usually rely, and nuns too, on going to the village for their food. For the day, and so I would go down there to collect food, from the village, at the village, and sometimes, quite often, I'd get this really incredible feeling of freedom. I think that's so strange, isn't it? You don't know whether people are going to give you food or not, but you feel very free, And it reminds me of Ajahn Brahm. There's a Buddha, actually it's a quote from the Buddha, one of Ajahn Brahm's favourites, is that a monk is free like a bird, just carrying, the bird has 2 wings, the bowl and the robes. I have a bit more that I carry. But it's true, the sense of freedom, I would get this when I was on alms round. And sometimes the mindfulness would just be so present and so clear and happy and radiant, because when we have that feeling of freedom, it really brings up a joy into the mind. So it is this feeling of freedom is something that is very important for all of us actually to develop, because sometimes we can feel very constricted or trapped in our lives, can't we? Especially, I remember the 9 to 5, just feeling, that this was a real cycle that we were caught in. I know when I see the kangaroos at the monastery here or at Newbury Buddhist Monastery in Victoria, where I usually stay, I see them and I see how they're caught in their lives, just eating, fighting, mating, giving birth, and just goes on and on and on. And the conditions of their rebirth are like that. And even though, to a certain extent, we have limitations too, we also have the opportunity to discover this freedom, this potential for freedom, for seeing the world differently, for actually breaking free of some of those things that limit us. So I'd like to just talk about what the Buddha was talking about when he said this Dhamma, the whole of the Dhamma actually has the taste of freedom, the Dhamma and the training, or Vinaya. And this is, I think, Because sometimes people, as I mentioned, they think, well, yeah, enlightenment, that's real freedom. You're really free when you're awakened. But, of course, when you say the whole of the practice, that's quite interesting for me. But there's a lovely talk by Ajahn Chah I listened to recently. During the Rains Retreat, I listened to quite a few of Ajahn Chah's talks, read by Ajahn Amaro. I really recommend listening to them. Reading them is a different experience. Listening to them is great. And he mentions the famous simile of the ladle or the spoon in the soup. And he says, as the Buddha uses this simile in the Dhammapada, and that the soup, the ladle or the spoon, it doesn't know the taste of the soup. It doesn't know the taste of the soup. And the Buddha says, and Ajahn Chah echoes it, he says, it's like a person who doesn't know the taste of the Dhamma. They may know the words, they may know some of the concepts, but they don't know the taste of the Dhamma because they're not practicing it. That's the bottom line, isn't it? That's the catch. In order to experience the taste of the Dhamma, you have to practice it. We need to practice it. So this is where we can really taste the Dhamma. And there's another verse in the Dhammapada where the Buddha says, tasting the flavour of solitude and peace, one becomes free of distress and evil, drinking the flavour of Dhamma joy. So that's the taste of Dhamma. So when we practice giving, we call it dana in Buddhism, in Pali, we call it dana. This is a form of freedom too. What does it actually brings a feeling of freedom quite often. When we give, it can be quite a uplifting, positive feeling. When we're receiving or expecting things, that can be a totally different feeling, actually, because we can be disappointed, it's not quite what we wanted, and these things. But of course, when we give wholeheartedly, it reduces our concern for getting stuff for ourselves, stinginess. So it reduces that. But also, it reduces that sense of self. We're not so concerned getting for ourselves. This is one of the main things that drives human beings, is a sense of getting, wanting to accumulate. And so this giving is an antidote to that. And it's why the Buddha emphasizes it so much. And it can have that taste of freedom for us. Because, as we say, we're reducing this sense of self. And it brings that happiness, that lightness, and of course, good karma as well. That's important. So this is a really foundational aspect of Buddhism. I'm always impressed that it's the first thing that the Buddha mentions in right view, samadhi, is dana. It really is, that there is an importance, a significance to giving, to sharing, and he says to sacrificing as well. And so this is an important aspect of practice. Sometimes people think practice is only the meditation, but there's more to it. And this giving is a really, really important part of it. And it really can develop the heart and develop the feelings. And so it's vital. And of course, the other aspect that has the taste of freedom, of course, is morality or virtue. Keeping the 5 precepts. This, some people might think, well, we're abstaining from or refraining from, killing living beings deliberately. We're refraining from taking what's not given. We're refraining from sexual misconduct and from lying, and also from taking alcohol and drugs, which cloud our awareness. So how can this be freedom? But this actually frees us from a lot of problems. I say to people, if you want an interesting life, if you want a life that's full of melodrama, break the 5 precepts, you'll soon have it. If you kill somebody, it'll be very obvious. They'll probably catch up with you or be worried about it. And if you steal, that can create incredible problems in our lives. And you see people that commit suicide because of that. And sexual misconduct, absolute dynamite. Absolute dynamite. In the press every day, not just occasionally. And speech, and of course lying, of course, brings enormous problems too. And in our relationships, lying will undermine that trust. In society too, it does that too. So when there's a lack of trust, it's usually due to the fact we cannot trust what other people are saying to us. So it's an important aspect of our practice to speak the truth in a kind way. And of course the last one, alcohol and drugs, is a difficult one in Australia. They think, wow, But really, I mean, in terms of the melodrama that can become our lives, it can generate any of the others, actually. Sexual misconduct, definitely. And and also speech, lying and stealing and all these things. So this is something that it's freeing us from. And there's a nice story that Ajahn Brahm actually tells it. He hasn't told it for a long time, I don't think. Maybe you've heard it. That some monks, maybe here actually, went to a restaurant and to a house, and they had an aquarium, and the fish that were in the aquarium were swimming around and looked okay. And some monks said, "Oh, look at it, it's trapped. It has no freedom." And the other monk said, "Oh, but it's free from predators, other fish, free from people who are fishing, free from the weather in terms of flooding and mud and all these sort of, free from, presumably if the person feeds them, from hunger." So it was a different way of looking at it. And the same with the precepts. They bring a freedom to us. And somebody said that to me the other day, yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before? They said that when they gave up, they said Ajahn Brahm, they talked about the precepts, and took the 5 precepts, and Ajahn Brahm said, "Which precept is hard for you?" And he said, "Alcohol and drugs." And he said then Ajahn Brahm said, "Can you give up alcohol and drugs?" And he was really surprised. He said, "Yes, I can." And he said when he said that, he felt so free. Because, of course, these things, a lot of these negative things that we do and say, they really imprison us, actually. They really restrict us. So we are getting freedom when we can say no to them. This is an important quality, to get joy from saying no to unwholesome, negative states of mind. Just saying, "No, I'm not going there, thank you." So this is very, very useful. So this has got the taste of freedom too, is the virtue. And this is really where we practice the Dhamma. I know Ajahn Chah used to emphasise that we're not really human beings if we're not keeping the 5 precepts. Quite interesting, isn't it? And so this is what makes us truly human, when we practice the 5 precepts. But of course, hopefully you got a taste of freedom in the meditation too, because that's where we can really free the mind. And so what are we freeing the mind from? Of course, we're freeing it from negative thoughts and emotions. This is one of the freedoms that comes through the meditation. So, and this is an important one, because as I mentioned, this is where our world is coming from, this mind that we develop. And so, you think the way some people develop their minds, you think, my goodness, like conspiracy theories, if one gets into those, they can become the reality of our lives. There's this enormous suspicion and distrust of many people, many institutions. So it depends on what we develop in our minds. And what we develop in our minds is always the test. Is it bringing happiness and peace or not? If it's bringing up a lot of negative stuff in our lives, then it's not worth pursuing. It's not worth investing our time in. And this is the test really for anything we experience in life. Is it diminishing the negative qualities? Is it allowing us to avoid the negative qualities, let go of them, develop positive qualities and maintain them? This, of course, is right view. So we can always check up, whether something is actually bringing those positive qualities, those wholesome qualities. But this meditation, of course, it's reconditioning our minds, not overnight, because, we are conditioning the mind all the time by the things that we focus on and repeat, the thoughts we have about other people and ourselves. Repeat them again and again, and this will become our experience of ourselves and other people. It can give rise to these feelings of ill will, anger, all these things, jealousy, envy, and depression as well. So when we use meditation, we can recondition the mind. We can create new habits in the mind, so that this becomes our usual abiding in the mind. And of course, the important thing with meditation, what it frees us from particularly, is the 5 hindrances. These are the qualities of the mind that prevent the mind from getting still, getting peaceful, developing more happiness in it. So those 5 hindrances, I think most of you will know, are of course desire. We call it sensory desire. So sensory desire is a very interesting area. It's really our whole world. It's unfortunate, but it's true. It's what we think about too, whether it be the cricket, the sport, whether it be, the government, the COVID, whatever it is. This is all part of the 5 sense world and our preoccupation with it. And of course, the next one is ill will, and the next one after that is drowsiness and dullness in the mind, and then restlessness and worry. And the last one is doubt. So during the meditation, we can, hopefully you manage to achieve it, be free of the past and the future. That's the first thing we're free of. We can get a taste of. And sometimes we can be free of thought, or we can be free of fighting with thought. It's very important. Thinking is a very natural thing. So if people sit down to meditate and expect they won't think, that's not probably going to happen, because if we spend most of our lives thinking and enjoying and encouraging thinking, then when we sit down, that is what we will experience. But we need not get into a battle with it. Just allow it to be. And from time to time, we'll be free of thought. And when there's freedom from thought, when there is that incredible silence and peace, that's an extraordinary experience. And I'm sure some of you have experienced that. These gaps when there is just no thinking, when all that thought stops. And it's very interesting, because so many of us think thinking is how we can be aware of the world. But in actual fact, when the thinking stops, we can really be aware of the world, because we haven't got that noise going on in the mind. We can see it clearly and be very happy just knowing what we're experiencing. So thinking is something that can stop. We can be free from. And of course, if the meditation goes deep enough, then we can be free of the body as well. And this is where we get this sense of tranquility of the body. The body can disappear as the mind starts to come together. We call it samadhi. then the body can disappear. And sometimes people experience that. They may feel like their hands, they can't feel their hands, or their feet, or something like that. And then they start to really worry, and that will derail that experience, of course. So then we can be free of the body, and of course, as I mentioned, we can be free of the 5 hindrances. And when we're free of the 5 hindrances, these qualities that stop us from seeing clearly, stop the mind from coming together, there is a great sense of freedom. We've actually freed ourselves in a big way. And of course, that when the mind is free of the 5 hindrances, free from the awareness of the body, then, of course, it can go into the very deep meditations, the jhanas. And after that, of course, the natural consequence of a mind that is still clear and free of the 5 hindrances is to see things as they truly are. Not as we wish they were or we'd like. We see them as they truly are. And so this gives rise to the freedom of wisdom when we really see things as they truly are. We see the nature of reality rather than the reality we experience through the screens of liking and disliking. That's usually what's running the show, actually, liking and disliking. And of course, this is when a person really starts to get close to the freedom of the first stage of enlightenment. And it's very interesting, the Buddha uses this word for when he's describing the 4 stages of enlightenment. We call it stream entry. Ajahn Brahm calls it stream winner. And then the once returner, then the non-returner, the once returner to the human world, non-returner will not return to the human world, and the arahant, when they finish with rebirth altogether. But he calls the things that keep us from attaining those, attaining is not probably the right word, but experiencing those freedoms of the 4 stages of enlightenment. The things that stop us, he calls fetters. These are sort of, I thought handcuffs might be quite good. People relate to it. What are shackles? Shackles is a bit old-fashioned too. But fetters is a bit old-fashioned too. You talk about fetters and people think, what is he talking about? But handcuffs they know, and maybe shackles. But they bind us to being reborn. And of course, the first stage of enlightenment, the things that, and this is where the real freedom begins to happen, actually, is when one sees that there is no permanent I, me, inside here. That this is a process that's going on of cause and effect. And when one sees this, then the practice. It's very interesting. The Buddha calls the first stage of enlightenment and up to the 3rd stage of enlightenment, he calls those persons trainees. They're in training. Before that, they're not even in training. It's quite interesting. So seeing that there's nobody here inside, not a permanent self. That doesn't mean there isn't a personality, a character. These are things we've accumulated from our conditioning. As you can see, with all of us, we can see that. For Ajahn Brahm, fish and chips. All things English, condensed milk, all these things. So there is a character. Sometimes when people hear this idea of non-self, anatta, they think, well, I feel like I'm here, and, and they can't quite relate to it. Of course, there is something here, and this is our conditioning, the sum of our conditioning to this stage, this life and past lives, of course. And this is actually, this sense of self is the main culprit that is really imprisoning us, really limiting us, really stopping us from being happy, really happy. And the second thing that the first stage of enlightenment, second thing that a person who becomes a stream enterer, overcomes, is believing in particular observances or rituals or rites that they will bring enlightenment. They know, because they've just experienced for themselves, that this is not the way. They know what the path is, because a stream enterer, they see that what is driving us is this chain of cause and effect. We call it dependent origination, they often call it. It's very technical, isn't it? Paticca Samuppada. That's what's driving things. They see that. They see the Four Noble Truths. So they know all these rituals and rites, they call them Silabata Paramasa, they're not going to result in enlightenment. And there are so many things that people think will bring awakening or enlightenment, which are very unlikely to. So this is another thing, another shackle or handcuff that the stream enterer has put an end to. And the third one that they've seen too is they've gone beyond doubt. Gone beyond doubt in the course, the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha, because they know that they've just experienced the Dhamma for themselves. When we say experienced, it's like a direct experience. They're not talking about theory. They're not talking about the Buddha's experience of enlightenment. They have to directly experience it themselves. And so they know, they've experienced the Dhamma and they know the path. So there's no doubt about the Dhamma and therefore about the Buddha and about the Sangha. They know that. And also they've done away with the doubt in themselves too, that they are capable of enlightenment. And so this is the first stage of enlightenment, and it leads to the course, the full enlightenment. We call that arahantship, when a person is totally freed permanently from defilements, totally free from attachments. I like to say too, sometimes people think, oh, somebody totally free of attachment, are they like a zombie? They have this idea, don't they? They say, oh, if you're very detached, you won't have any feeling or care for anybody. And then I always say to people, well, who was the most detached person that we know of in history? The Buddha. And he was full of metta, loving kindness, full of compassion, full of joy for others' happiness and success, full of equanimity or acceptance of people and situations as they are. So detachment doesn't mean you're cold and indifferent. It doesn't mean that at all. So this is the freedoms that the Buddha is talking about. And of course, the real freedoms, as I say, are to be free of all these negative qualities. And the Buddha called becoming fully enlightened the highest happiness. And this being free from attachment means that a person who has attained or has experienced full awakening will not be reborn again. And then they will, as it were, they've experienced Nibbana, the end of being born again and again. So this is the ultimate freedom. The ultimate in freedom is breaking out of the conditioning that we live in, breaking out of being a human being, breaking out of being an animal, a kangaroo, or whatever it is, whatever the limitation that we live within. So this is what the Buddha is pointing to when he talks about the taste of freedom. So it's not something that we only focus on in terms of awakening or enlightenment. It's what we focus on in terms of our practice. All of our practice is leading to that freedom, that clarity which can see things as they are and free us from, this ignorance that we are shackled by, that we are limited by. Because the two things that, of course, And I was going to read this. I'll read it actually because I think it's so nice. The Buddha says, this samsara is without a beginning. Samsara is like the wheel of being born again and again in different lives. And the first point is not found of beings. And Ajahn Brahm's translation is roaming and wandering. But I quite like another translation, hurrying and hastening. These are through our lives. Blinded by delusion and addicted to wanting. They are the two culprits, actually. We don't know, and also we think that wanting, that desire is going to bring us happiness. It's actually enslaving us even more and more that we buy into it. And there's one term that the Buddha uses for this. It's one of my favourite Pali terms, actually, and it's tanha dasa. Tanha dasa. Slaves of craving. And that's what most of us are, slaves of craving. And we actually are not aware of that, and we think this is going to provide our happiness. But in actual fact, it's only enslaving us. And it's not giving us that freedom. So that's that's quite heavy, isn't it? Being a slave of craving. But it's not, it's something we can overcome because the Buddha's teaching, the key to liberation, what's the key to liberation? The Noble Eightfold Path. And particularly right view. If we don't have an understanding of how the world is, even intellectually, like intellectually we begin, then there's no way that we can break out, that we can find freedom and experience right view as our own experience of the world. So these two things, ignorance and craving or wanting, are what bind us, that really bind us. And we can break through them and see with proper wisdom and develop. These stages of enlightenment will just happen when we have seen with proper wisdom. So I'd like to finish there. Wait a minute, I might read, there's another nice quote, and this is from a sutta called on Ratapala, and it's called, "The world is incomplete," or lacking is another translation. "Insatiable, the slave of craving." That's where it comes, one of the quotes for it, slave of craving. So this is something, we can go beyond being slaves. We can go beyond this feeling of lack, of being incomplete, and find peace, happiness, and freedom of the Dhamma. And we do that through practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. And our practice of particularly dana, giving, and morality and virtue, and of course meditation, developing the mind and wisdom, these areas. And whatever degree we've developed, that is this taste of freedom that many of us, I think many of you will probably already have experienced to a certain extent, that it's changed the way you see life, the way you see the relationships you are in, the way you see work, the way you see many things in the world. And so we are already getting this taste of freedom from practicing the Dhamma. And we can continue until we get the ultimate freedom of the Dhamma, the ultimate taste of the Dhamma, which is full enlightenment. So I'd like to finish there, and just to ask if there are any comments or questions about this evening's talk, or anything really, that's fine. May you and may I have the taste of freedom. Yeah, some questions? No questions from... No? Nobody's saying, no, I'm not a slave of craving. Let's see. Oh, there's a few questions. Right. Oh, righto. And this one is from from Germany. How can you soothe and embrace chronic pain and or fear? How can you touch... Oh, wait a minute. That's it. Back to it. How can you touch something that hurts to be... How can you touch something that hurts to be kind to it and calm down and find peace? Thank you. Yes, that's right. This chronic pain is actually an incredibly difficult thing to deal with. Fear is also a difficult thing to deal with. Often, if I experience pain or fear, one thing that's very useful is, of course, metta, bringing to mind like being a mother or a father and soothing that pain or that fear, holding one's hand, as it were, inside. These sorts of approaches, especially this metta, can help us. I mean, the pain will be there, but if we can be kind, like we're parenting ourselves, this can be very useful and reassuring as well. And yes, how can you touch something that hurts and regard it, I suppose, to be kind and to calm it down and find peace? And again, I would use this image of the parent soothing whatever unpleasant experience we're having, being there for ourselves. That's very important, actually. So that's how I would recommend soothing and embracing chronic pain or fear. I don't think chronic pain is a very easy thing to deal with. It's a very hard practice. The Buddha talked about sickness, old age, and death in terms of impermanence. They are where we see, where we are practicing the Dhamma, developing our insight, our understanding, our wisdom. I often say to people, old age is really hard practice if you really see it for what it is. Many people are actually just trying to distract themselves as much as possible to not look at it. And the same with chronic pain. It's in your face. You have to deal with it. You have to be there for it. And the best thing too is that can be helpful actually, is to be in contact with people who have had to deal with chronic pain. And I remember there's a woman, she's New Zealander actually, who lives in Britain, who had chronic pain. And she found, it was just so overwhelming, the thing she found that was very, very useful, that actually sort of gave her freedom, was to realise she only had to deal with this moment. If she started thinking of, an hour from now, tomorrow, next year, and having this pain all the time, because that's the trouble with all our experience actually, negative experience. We think it's going to go on forever, and it feels so overwhelming when it's like that. So she had that approach, and I think she had started a group called something about breathing, actually. I saw a video of her work, and it was really interesting, but she had chronic pain from a car accident, and she was really, as I say, pushed. That's where, these things like chronic pain, they really are hard practice, but they can be very good results too from that practice. You can transform it. So I hope that's okay for Germany. And this is from Iran. We are taught to behave with love and kindness. I do it to others, but I must confess when I see no or little love and kindness from those who I was kind to, I feel bad. Right. Well, I would say we can only look after our own minds. We can't look after other people's minds. And if we've been loving and kind and they haven't reciprocated, that's their loss. We have that love and kindness in our minds. Expecting results from other people other reactions, is only going to lead to disappointment. We can't change them, but we can, we can look after our mind, our heart, and that having love and kindness in it, that's good enough. That's the reward in itself. That's enough. Whether other people appreciate it, that's their business. It's like when people say, "Oh, I did so much for this person," and they didn't even say thank you. They weren't grateful at all. And I think, well, why derail your happiness because of that? They have failed to get the happiness of thinking, "Oh, fantastic, this person did this for me. Lovely, that's wonderful. Thank you." They have missed out on the happiness, the person who didn't say thank you. But if we expect something back from other people, then it's derailing our happiness. Why they don't react, that's their business, their conditioning, where they're coming from. So I would say that this love and kindness that you have within yourself, Iran, person from Iran, that's enough. That's its own reward. And the next one is from, the liquid cat. That's interesting. Don't know about that. Dear Ajahn, how do we break through the conditioning once we see it? Well, that's it. Once we see it, we have broken through it, really. But it's really having that clarity, that window of opportunity, when the mind is free of the 5 hindrances, all the negative stuff, then we can see things clearly, and we can see the conditioning that has produced who we are at this particular moment. So this is, of course, we break through the conditioning to a very big extent at the first stage of enlightenment, don't we? At stream entry, when we can see the process of cause and effect that Paticca Samuppada presents. We experience it as an experience. It's not theory. So that's when we see that things are arising due to cause and effect, and then we're breaking through some of the conditioning and not believing some of the conditioning. That's the point. So very good. Another one here, the next question from Huey K. What to do if the freedom is scary to a person? My friend says that she doesn't want to see the reality if it is different from what she believes. Isn't that interesting? It might be better than what she believes. That's what I would say, actually. No. But this is one of the attachments that we have, is our attachments to our views and opinions, our beliefs. And for some of us, for most people actually, if that's seriously challenged, that can lead to a lot of unhappiness for them. It may not be actually true, but it's something that we are very comfortable with. That's the way we see the world. And to hear that this is not the way the world is could be scary. But I think anybody that's dedicated, because Dhamma is about truth, isn't it? We're looking for truth. There is a certain amount of courage, but we are interested in the truth. And also the thing is that a lot of this talking about beliefs and so on is just thinking. If we meditate, we get our own experience of when thinking drops away, when beliefs drop away, when views drop away. And we're happy, we're peaceful. Then we'll get the strength. We'll see this is not that scary, actually. It's actually enjoying it. So I would say, a lot of that's driven by thinking, but it's not surprising, because one of the 4 attachments is attachment to views and beliefs, opinions. The other 3 are attachment to sensory experience. That's a biggie. That's what we're reborn to experience those things we like, the people we like, the food we like, all that stuff. We will try and get reborn so we can re-experience it, and we'll get reborn because of our attachment to our views, to a view of a self. This is a 3rd the third aspect of it, of upadana, attachment, and the fourth is rites and rituals, observances. We can get really attached to doing things in particular ways. So, and now the last one from Hong Kong. Why? I have OCD and anxiety tendencies. I find it hard to be free from intrusive and self-sabotaging thoughts. I also keep debating with myself, unable to decide. What can I do? Well, I think that the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is to develop loving kindness. Metta is incredibly useful thing to develop, and a happy thing to develop, because those qualities of anxiety is coming from fear, and when we have metta, it frees us from fear, actually, because the mind cannot have fear and metta in it at the same time. Of course, it can alternate. The mind can move very quickly, but this kindness to ourselves will overcome a lot of the self-sabotaging thoughts, and help with the anxiety, and reduce OCD, because the obsessive compulsive disorder is built to a large extent on fear, isn't it? It's driven by fear. We've got to control stuff, and so when we develop metta and we're freeing ourselves or reducing the fear in our minds and increasing this kindness, this sense of, because metta has a sense of safety and security as well. So that when we do that, we are, as it were, dealing with the root cause, maybe of OCD, which can be fear, anxiety, worry. And there was a nice quote I had from Aung San Suu Kyi about that. It's nice. It's probably you probably all know it, actually. It was news to me. What was it? It was a nice quote. She says, whoa. I wonder if I can find it. No, I can't. She says that freedom, real freedom, is freedom from fear. That's the real freedom, and I think that's a very, very true. That we can. It's one of the most crippling aspects of our mental life is fear. It's so limiting, and we won't even try because of fear. Sometimes it can be fear of what other people think of us. It can be fear of our own lack of ability or capability, all these things. So I would say to the person from Hong Kong, please practice being your own best friend. Being your own best friend. Being there for yourself. Developing those qualities of a best, bring to mind those qualities of a best friend, and allow that feeling that you have for a best friend to come into the mind and give it to yourself. Bring up that feeling of metta. Because metta, the word metta actually is related to the Pali word mitta, which is friend. So being your own best friend is a great way. You'll always have someone there to hold your hand, as it were, within, and to soothe you, calm you down, and reassure you. So I'd like to finish there and thank everyone for bearing with. I hope you've got taken away something that's of use for you about freedom of the mind. So now, for those who would like to, we can pay respects to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. This is getting up. Ooh. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Amivademi Swakato
Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami
Supatipanno
Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami.
Great. Oh. Ah. Sukhihoto. Okay. Good. Hello, Premalal Mate. Yes. Oh, yes, yeah.